Good morning. Today is the second day of the second Adar and the 12th of March. We're up to the third reading of Pekudei, and we're going to look at the verse that culminates, that consummates the entire building construction, the planning, the artisanship and the craftsmanship that went into the tabernacle. And the verse reads, all the work of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, was completed. We're talking about Exodus 39:32. And this is going to be a little bit different than what I usually do, because the person who wrote this teaching from Rav Ginsburg is our deepest thinker. And the way that he usually structures things is not so informative, but rather existential, meaning that he teaches things in a way that they are meant to touch upon the very basis of our existence. So, we'll start with a couple of quotes. The quote, usually the way that people understand the construction of the tabernacle is that it parallels the creation of the world. And there's a whole list of parallel phrases and ideas that appear in the Medrash, the rabbis talk about. And one of the most pronounced is the conclusion of both accounts. So at the conclusion of the account of creation, it said, God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. The heavens and the earth were completed. God blessed the seventh day. Now listen to what happens here in our parsha, in our portion. All the work of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, was completed. Moses saw that they had indeed done all the work exactly as God had commanded, and Moses blessed them. So really, the three components are there, both in the end of the account of creation and the end of the account of the tabernacle. Now, how is this connected? Well, the way that this is usually understood is that we could become partners with God. The usual explanation is that God created the world and left it unfinished, and he entrusted to us, humanity, to complete it. And we perfect reality with what we call 39 categories of labor. And these are the concerted and intentional efforts made by mankind through culture and civilization, and they allow us to partner with God. And these same 39 categories of labor which complete the world are what are also forbidden on the Sabbath. So that's the way that this is usually explained. But there are a lot of reasons to say that this is an incomplete explanation of the parallel. And what we're going to do now is we're going to look at a completely different direction. And let's start like this. If creation has a source, has a creator, then it must have a purpose. Why? Because that's the conclusion that our human logic comes to. It dictates that an intelligent agent does not act without purpose. So if God is an agent, obviously he's intelligent, so he must have a purpose in creating the world. But we can't escape the conclusion that this is based on our limited human logic. In fact, we might argue that the reason that we feel this way is because we cannot escape our own monotonous nature without placing a purpose or goal before us to guide our actions. But it is not at all granted that the Creator must be the same. One might say, who has scaled the heavens into God's mind to tell us whether he too requires purpose? Why would he require purpose to act? Is he not already perfect in every way? Is his will not perfect even if he chooses not to act? So it might be that the whole contention that an intelligent agent has to have purpose in order to act is just a human conclusion, but not necessarily how God is. So dealing with this question, the Torah's inner dimension has many works, and they describe God's reason or purpose in creation in two different ways. One is, there is no reason to his will, meaning he creates without purpose. He doesn't need purpose in order to create. That is very shocking to a lot of people, because the first thing you would think is, well, it has to have purpose. And here we're saying, and these are the deepest books of the Torah's inner dimension, that are saying there is no purpose to his will. He doesn't create because of purpose. So there's no purpose to things. That's a bit of a shock. The second formulation is there is a concealed reason to his will, meaning there is reason, there is a purpose, but it's concealed. So even though both these formulations deny that the Creator would have the same type of limited purpose that a human being might have, still they mean two different things. And we could call these the will to create and the will to dwell, and they're different. The first one that says there is no purpose is mirrored in nature. And the second, or according to the second formulation, according to which God has a concealed purpose in creation, is mirrored in the commandment to construct for him a dwelling place, the tabernacle and later the temple. So how does this work? Why would having no reason be expressed in nature, and having a reason, having purpose, be expressed in the tabernacle? Well, let's start like this. God creates creation from a place of freedom. But man constructs the tabernacle by harnessing his will and subjugating himself to God's commandments. So notice there are two things here. Nature is free, and God commands man to make the tabernacle. If nature is free, meaning it's not a command, there's no command, as it were, for nature to be the way it is, then we could say that nature is without reason. There's no purpose. Now, true that nature has laws and an order that it must follow, so to speak, but they don't define nature. In fact, nature is full of what to human intelligence looks like waste. Think about the incomprehensibly vast empty space between planets, stars, and galaxies in the cosmos. That's like waste. Thousands of hatchling fish, few of which will keep the species going. And you could go on and on. Nature has laws, it seems, but it's not limited by those laws. And the fact that there's waste is telling, and an incredible amount of waste. This is one of the things that religion has a huge problem with. That nature is not as subject to order as it would seem. In fact, the way we understand nature today is that it's destined to return to a disordered state because of the law of entropy. What the law of entropy says is that everything that has order will eventually fall back into disorder. And in the end, what you'll get is one big homogeneous soup, lacking rhyme, reason, or purpose. Until then, the forces of nature continue to clash with one another, but in the end, does it matter which one wins? The victor, too, will end up a formless mass. So it doesn't matter if volcanoes win against humanity wins against climate. It doesn't matter. Everything, according to science at least, will end up in the same homogeneous, formless mass and soup. All this reminds us of the meanderings of the infinite in and within itself. There's a concept called shashuim atzmim, which says that God is meandering in himself, as it were, without rhyme or reason. And it permits him to squander that which has no value and require no effort. This is a side of godliness that we know. This is not something to run away from. It's not something to try to deny. It's something that we see, and we see it through nature. We see the lack of purpose in nature. But there is another conclusion that man can reach. This one is more personal and urgent. I tell myself that even if God is pleased with his creation, be it as it may, I would prefer to survive and not be swallowed up and carried off into the tumult of the clash between the forces of nature. If I wish to sustain myself, my being, my ego, with all its shouting existence, I must battle to save whatever I can from nature's chaos. That's what humanity does. We battle entropy all the time. We do whatever we can to prevent us from being swallowed up into entropy. Now it is under this premise that the mind stands in opposition to nature, not as something that would work to complete or perfect nature, that we need to look at the tabernacle. In other words, this is very different than saying the tabernacle is the completion of nature. In fact, it's saying the tabernacle is everything that is opposed to nature. It's man's fight against nature, against purposelessness, against lack of reason, against the homogeneous soup that everything will become eventually. Following God's commandment to build the tabernacle is actually a fight against the purposeless nature of the world. So the more humanity develops its culture and civilization, the more it invests in personal character, and the more it distances itself from hearing the call of the infinite that permeates reality. In fact, we don't want to hear the infinite, because the infinite is going to go back to entropy. The infinite is where there are infinite meanderings that don't mean anything, or at least they don't mean anything to us. And if God created us with our need for self, with our need for personal character, for civilization, for fighting against entropy, it means that he wants something. It wasn't for nothing. That's what we call, there's a concealed purpose to creation. There's a concealed purpose to God's act. And so we close ourselves off from nature and sequester ourselves, holding on to small enclaves of security, and forgo any chance of meeting the vast expanse of nature. That's what humanity does. Humanity, by definition, closes itself from nature, or at least from nature as the powerful forces that are beyond our conception, beyond our comprehension, beyond our ability to tame, if you want. And we like nature that is tame. We like nature that is under control. We can't deal with nature in its infinite power, because there we get lost. And especially what gets lost is our feeling that we would like to survive. Thus, when God commands us to build him a home, it is through that dwelling that he will be felt, and his purpose, his reason, his will, in a sense, even his needs, if you want, will be revealed despite our seclusion from the infinite in nature. How is this so? Because a regular dwelling is like a garment that a person wears. Though it is further removed from his body than his clothing, one might still say that the soul has more freedom to express itself in the home, which is not as tightly on the body as an article of clothing would be. The home protects the person like a garment, but its variants are much greater. You can have much more variance in terms of what kind of home you live in than what kind of garment you live in. Because of the variety of options that can make up a home, the fact that it is built one way and not another expresses the will of the owner even more than clothing does. So likewise, when the Almighty commands us to construct him a home, the tabernacle, down to the last detail, it is meant to express his precise desire. In other words, he cares. He wants it this way and not that way. But remember what we said about nature, where the exact opposite is the case, where God, as it were, has no purpose. He doesn't care. So the tabernacle is the complete counter, the opposition to nature. So what is the tabernacle revealing? Because God commanded that all his desires, all his fancies for the tabernacle, his home, all be artfully made by human beings, and that they should be guided by their own craftsmanship, this suggests that human beings have a way of revealing God's concealed purpose for creating reality, and can identify with it, because he's asking us to churn this dream that he has, his desires, his whims, into something that actually is a dwelling. So man is not destined to merely fight against the forces of nature his entire life, trying to keep them at bay. Rather, he can access his Creator's deep concealed reason or purpose and choose to identify and mimic it. So we have discovered then that God has a vested interest in human beauty, in orderly beauty, and not only in the wild, untamed beauty in nature. God yearns to have a place to dwell, one that reflects his affinity with man, who seemed to have a desire and need for order only because he is limited. We thought in the beginning that the reason that we need purpose is because we're limited. But here we see that we have this in common with God because he commands us to create him a dwelling place. And that dwelling place should be just so, but just so with our input. Just so because we can identify with this need that God has, as it were. And we know how to do that. We know how to express that type of purpose, that type of need. So these limits are not found to have a source high above. It is only that like has found like. God has found man and man has found God. In other words, it's not that God's needs are like our needs. It's not the same thing. It's not that if God doesn't get what he wants, he's lacking in some way. He doesn't need that. But we're the same in a certain sense. He can identify with us and we can identify with him. When we build the tabernacle, then we're connecting to God's purpose in creation. We can better understand the novelty of the tabernacle by considering that the Torah does not say they shall build me a tabernacle and I will dwell in it. Rather, the Torah says they shall build me a tabernacle and I will dwell in them. So apparently every person can feel like a furnishing, one of the things that makes up God's house. Our stance in life, our location where we live, our cleanliness, they all have significance and can affect the harmony of the entire dwelling, and therefore should be considered carefully. In other words, the way that we act, the way we are in our lives, is part of the furnishing of this purpose that the Creator has. It's part of what makes it up. We've found ourselves in God, and God, as it were, has found himself in us. The individual who is mindful that his entire body should act according to God's commandments will soon feel that there is a spirit that breathes through the entire dwelling being civilization, the world as humanity experiences it, and provides him with a slight peek, looking into the concealed purpose behind all of creation. So it is not by chance that God yearns to create a place to dwell below and wishes to enter and fill his home, the tabernacle and later the temple, because it is a home that allows his preferences to exist harmoniously. In nature they don't exist, and certainly not harmoniously. In nature, it's the stronger you are, the more powerful you become, the more you vanquish your enemies. The forces of nature are constantly fighting one another. But in human beings, when we understand that each human being represents another furnishing in God's home, another piece of that purpose with which he created us, then the boundaries between the parts cooperate and shine out even to the individual who feels estranged and alone in a world of dissociation. So with that, and I recommend, once you've heard this once, go over it again, and if that's not enough, read it. I'm saying this is different than the style we usually use in explaining Rav Ginsburg's teachings. This is a very philosophical, existential type of piece. But I encourage you to spend the time to try to figure out what it's saying to you. I hope that was clear. If you can't see it from the video, I really recommend reading it on our Patreon site, patreon.com/Galeinai, Galeinai. It's the article for today, the third reading of Pekudei. I wish you all a good day and hope to see you tomorrow.